A Denver judge dismissed a lawsuit this week that challenged the petition signature submitted by U.S. Senate candidate Jon Keyser. The judge cited that the deadline to challenge the petitions passed weeks ago. Mail-in ballots to the primary election go out next week. David, a few weeks back when the whole signature thing started with the U.S. Senate Republican candidates, you had said that once the judgments came in that they were going to be back on the ballot, that it wouldn't dog them. Do you still feel that way in the case of Jon Keyser?
Yes, because again, this is an inside politics issue. I don't think voters are going to have much interest in it, and it was a fairly thin case as presented. They had affidavits from 10 people who said that their signatures were forged, and I'm sure that was true, but that's not really enough to throw a guy off the ballot. And as the judge said, certainly not at this late date. But what's the most important thing about this is the anti-Keyser people hired Mark Ruskin, who's an excellent lawyer, but not cheap, for something they knew had almost no chance of success. And so why do that? It shows how afraid they are of Keyser. This is, you know, if I were in a Republican primary voter and I'm saying, you know, I want to pick the candidate who's got the best chance of winning in November, what this tells you absolutely is the one that the pro-Bennett forces are scared of by far is Keyser.
Joey, what do you think of that point? Because that's the point that Jon Keyser has made himself several times in debates and whatnot, that he's a target of the left and therefore he's the most, I guess, attractive candidate at this point. At least feared candidate is most, I guess, the accurate way to say that. Do you believe that claim? Does it have some meat to it?
Well, I don't know. I agree with about 90% of what Dave said. What I don't agree with is that voters aren't paying attention. You know, they may not understand the details of the law and the ins and outs and the wonky stuff, but now we've spent another week talking about Jon Keyser being incompetent. And that's not, you know, we're 3 weeks out from the primary. I don't know how much time he's got to recover. As far as him being the guy that Bennett's the most afraid of, the only people I hear saying that is Jon Keyser. I think that the people, there's, you know, it's a mixed field. I think the candidate that, if he can survive the primary, and I'm not sure that he can, that would be Jack Graham, because he would attract more of those moderate voters than Keyser, Darrell Glenn, Ryan Frazier, Robert Blaha, any of those would. So in a general election, my money would be on Jack Graham. In the primary, it's on Darrell Glenn.
I get that point, especially Jack Graham being the most moderate candidate in this kind of a season. The script that the Bennett campaign used against Ken Buck, that Mark Udall used against Cory Gardner unsuccessfully, really couldn't be the same situation. I get what you're saying there. Ed, mail-in ballots go out next week, so we're only a couple days away from some Republican voters being able to make their voice heard immediately. What do you make of the race so far? We've heard so much about signatures and petitions. Is that going to dominate where voters are thinking about?
You know, it's funny that you asked that, because I'm doing a 5-part series next week on where the 5 candidates stand on business issues, and the universal response I got when I started asking them questions is, wow, thanks for actually asking us about issues. You're right. I mean, this has not been a race about, you know, who is nuanced on their views on foreign relations or on tax policy. This has been all about 3 people who had to get the court's help to make it onto the ballot, and one candidate who won 70% of the backing at the Republican state convention, and still gets people pointing to him saying, no way he could possibly go any further. So I think that I'm going to jump in here, and I'm going to say I fully agree with Dave on this one. I mean, the idea that they have spent so much capital attacking Jon Keyser, you know, hiring a handwriting analyst to look over these things, Progress Now calling for a criminal investigation on his campaign, and yet you have targets like Blaha and Frazier, whose credentials for being on this ballot are far more suspect based on Wayne Williams' initial booting them off of the ballot. I think it really is. I think Keyser has looked green. He's looked robotic in some of his responses. His fundraising's not up to what people wanted, and somehow he seems to be scaring the dickens out of Michael Bennet right now if the Democrats are concentrating their forces on this. I'm waiting to see now that this tactic has failed. If we see what we've seen in other states' Republican primaries for Senate contests before, and that is the Democrats coming in under a different name and propping somebody else up because they see them as an easier candidate to beat. Maybe we'll start seeing some pro-Daryl Glenn ads or some pro Robert Blaha ads coming out there. I don't know. It's been really intriguing to see. So much has been focused on Jon Keyser, who is repeatedly called the second-rate candidate, but he's got so much of a different target on his back than the other 4 candidates.
Patty, should someone file a lawsuit to mandate better advertisements?
Well, and not just in this campaign. Let's face it, we could use them everywhere. Well, here's another tactic we could see. Democrats registering as Republicans so they can vote in the primary on June 28th. There's still time to change party affiliations if you want to vote. You can still, if you haven't registered to vote, you can still register by Monday. So you could see a drive going to change that. Then on the other hand, if you don't register Democrat, you can't vote for the DA's candidates in Denver, which is another really hotly contested race that we've heard almost nothing about. It's amazing how little we know about the positions of the 3 running for DA, the 5 running for Senate, although we certainly know all about Keyser's dog. So it's appropriate that he's been dogged by other accusations. And now the fact that even though he was a lifelong Republican, he took a little hiatus.